Chapter 1. A Life of Crime. John Sheppard was a thief and highwayman, but he became a very popular figure in his lifetime because of his extraordinary courage. At least 2 plays were written about him, and society was fascinated by his life and adventures. John Sheppard's father was a carpenter in a poor part of London called Spitalfields. He had 2 sons, John, who was born in 1702, and Thomas. John was always known as Jack. The 2 brothers both became famous robbers. Jack was the first of the 2 brothers to begin a life of crime. He worked for a carpenter in London, but he soon began to spend a lot of time at the Black Lion pub in Drury Lane. It was here that he met a woman called Elizabeth Lyon, but more commonly known among her friends as Edgeworth Bess. Jack fell under her influence, and they formed a partnership.
"I can make you rich,"
she told him.
"How?"
he asked her.
"Listen,"
she said.
"you're a carpenter. You work in rich people's houses. That gives you the perfect opportunity to steal valuable objects."
At first, Jack was very successful, and no one suspected him of the robberies that were taking place in the houses where he worked. He stole valuable items for Edgeworth Bess, and she sold them for him. Jack also had another woman friend, named Maggot, and she persuaded him to rob a local merchant, Mr. Baines, who was a trader in valuable cloth. First, Jack went to Mr. Baines's house and bought some cloth in order to see what the house was like inside. He went home and put the piece of cloth in his trunk. The same night, he returned secretly to the house. He broke in and stole money and other property, which he then took to Maggot. Jack did not go back to his master's home that night, or the next, and his master began to be suspicious of the young man's activities. He decided to open Jack's trunk to see what was inside. He found the piece of cloth that Jack had bought from Mr. Baines. When Jack finally returned home, he realized that his master now had evidence that connected him with Mr. Baines. So Jack stole the piece of cloth back from his employer and hid it. When Jack's master heard about the robbery at Mr. Baines's house, he was sure that Jack was involved. He contacted Mr. Baines and described the piece of cloth that he had seen in Jack's trunk. Mr. Baines knew immediately that Jack was the young man who had bought the cloth, and he too guessed that the purchase of the cloth was a trick to enter his house. When Jack heard that he was suspected, he pretended to get very angry.
"I haven't stolen anything,"
he shouted.
"My mother gave me that piece of cloth."
"Did she?" Mr. Baines said. "And where did she get it from?"
"Ask her yourself,"
Jack said. "I think I will," his master replied. Jack's master sent for the boy's mother and asked her about the cloth.
"My son's telling the truth,"
she said.
"I bought the cloth at a market in Spitalfields."
"Where exactly in the market did you buy it?" the master asked.
"I don't remember,"
Jack's mother said. Jack's master and Mr. Baines did not believe what Jack and his mother told them, but they had no direct evidence against Jack for the robbery. Despite his suspicions of him, Jack's master decided to let the boy continue to work for him as an apprentice. Jack became more and more involved in crime. and he finally became part of a gang led by Jonathan Wild, another famous criminal. He now worked for himself as a carpenter, and this meant that he continued to have easy entrance to rich people's houses. In one case, he was repairing a house belonging to an elderly gentleman in a rich area of London. He robbed the gentleman of money, jewellery, and expensive clothes. Shortly after this robbery, Edgeworth Bess was arrested and sent to a local prison. Jack went to the prison and demanded to see his friend. When the prison officer refused him permission, Jack attacked him and went in.
"You're coming with me,"
he told Edgeworth Bess.
What do you mean?
She asked him.
I'm a prisoner here. I can't come with you.
"Yes, you can."
Jack told her with a laugh.
"I knocked the officer out. He won't give us any trouble now."
He picked up Bess and carried her out of the prison. This episode made him very popular with the criminal world in London, especially with the women. The brothers, Tom and Jack, worked together, robbing houses and selling the items that they had stolen. They also continued to work with Edgeworth Bess. They broke into the house of a merchant, Mrs. Cook, and stole some valuable items. Tom tried to sell them, but he was arrested and taken to Newgate Prison, where some of London's most notorious criminals were kept. He offered to give evidence against his brother, Jack, and Edgeworth Bess, in order to receive a lighter punishment. The authorities looked everywhere for Jack and Edgeworth Bess, but they could not find them. One day, Jack met a friend of his in the street, a man called James Sykes. Sykes knew that the authorities were looking for Jack, and he made a plan. He hoped to get a lot of money for capturing Jack. He took Jack into a pub and bought him a lot of beer. While Jack was happily drinking, Sykes sent for a constable. The constable arrested Jack and took him to prison. Jack waited until the middle of the night and then made a hole in the roof of the prison and escaped. Jack's freedom did not last long. He was soon arrested again, and this time he and Edgeworth Bess were taken to another prison. The authorities thought that Jack and Bess were husband and wife, and they allowed them to live together in a room in the prison called Newgate Ward. A few days after their arrival at the prison, Jack managed to cut off his iron chains. He then made a hole in the prison wall and removed one of the iron bars from the window. He looked down and saw that it was too far to jump to the ground. So he tied some sheets together and tied one end around a bar in the window. Then he helped Edgeworth Bess to climb down to the ground, and he quickly followed her. They were now in front of a high prison wall, but they managed to climb over it and escape into the city. The criminal class of London enjoyed hearing about Jack's adventures, and he became a hero to them. One criminal, Charles Grace, asked if he could work with Jack, and Jack agreed. Charles and Jack made friends with a young man called Anthony Lamb, who worked for a maker of mathematical instruments. They planned to rob a wealthy gentleman who lived in the instrument maker's house. Late one night, Lamb opened the door of the house and let Jack and Charles in, and they stole a lot of money. When the robbery was discovered the next morning, Anthony Lamb was very frightened. His master sent for him and asked what had happened. "I don't know, sir," Lamb replied. His master looked at him suspiciously. He saw that the young man's hands were shaking.
"I don't believe you,"
he said angrily.
"I think you stole the money, and you'll be hanged for it."
In the end, Lamb confessed his involvement in the crime. He was sent to Newgate Prison, tried, and then transported. Thomas Sheppard was also tried for the robbery of Mrs. Cook, and he was transported as well. Jack Sheppard then started working with another famous criminal, a man called Blueskin. They sometimes sold the items that they had stolen to a man called William Field. Meanwhile, they hired a stable in which they kept what they had stolen before selling it. Among the other stolen items in the stable was a length of cloth that had been taken from a certain Mr. Kneebone. It was stealing this piece of cloth that led to Jack's next arrest. One day, Jack and Blueskin asked William Field to go to their stable and look at the items they had, so that he could find buyers for them. Field, who was a coward but an imaginative criminal, did more than that. He broke into the stable and stole everything. Then he went to Jonathan Wild, knowing his influence in the criminal world, and told him that Jack was working with Blueskin. Jack and Blueskin were arrested soon after and sent to Newgate Prison, where they were tried for their robberies, and Jack was sentenced to death for the theft of the cloth belonging to Mr. Kneebone. Chapter 2. Great Escapes. An order for the execution of Jack Sheppard arrived at Newgate Prison on Monday the 30th of August, 1724. Once again, Jack showed his extraordinary courage. There was a place in the prison where friends could come to talk to the prisoners. The visitors and the prisoners were separated by a hole in the wall that had bars in it. Jack loosened one of the bars. When some women friends came to visit him, he broke the bar off the wall completely, and the women pulled him through the hole. He was a free man once again. Jack went to see a friend of his called Page, and they went into the country for a week. On their return to London, they passed a watchmaker's shop. They were surprised to see that the shop was open, but that there was only a boy guarding it. Jack immediately broke the shop window and pulled out some valuable watches. Jack's friends now knew that he was back in London, and they warned him that the authorities were looking everywhere for him. They eventually found where he was hiding and took him back to Newgate Prison. This time, they were determined to stop him escaping.
"You've been very lucky in the past,"
one of the officers told him.
"but you're not going to escape from us again. We'll make sure it's impossible."
They put iron chains on his legs and handcuffs on his wrists. The chains on his legs were attached to a ring in the floor of his prison cell. His adventures had by now made Jack famous with all social classes, and many important people came to visit him. Some of his visitors gave him money.
"Who knows if he'll try to escape again?"
they thought. Sheppard found a nail in the room, which he used to open the lock that attached his chain to the ring in the floor. Then he used the same nail to open his handcuffs. He could not remove the chains, but he pulled them as high up his legs as he could. His next move was to climb the chimney in the room, but his way was blocked by an iron bar. He then worked with his hands to free the iron bar. He climbed back up the chimney and made his way into the room above. No one had used this room for many years, and the door was locked, but it did not take Sheppard long to break it. He then went into the prison chapel and climbed onto the roof of the prison. He looked down and saw that the nearest building was a long way below him. If he jumped, it would be very dangerous. He went back to his original cell and took the blanket from the bed. Then he went back onto the roof. He tied one end of the blanket to the roof of the prison and then climbed down to the neighbouring house. It was midnight by now, and Sheppard was exhausted after his escape. He walked to the edge of the city and found a stable where he slept for some hours. It was raining when he woke up, and he was cold and hungry. He bought some food from a little shop nearby and returned to the stable. Next, he tried to remove the chains from his legs by hitting them with a stone. 2 long, miserable days passed. Finally, a shoemaker passed by the stable, and Sheppard asked him to help remove the chains, offering to pay the man 20 shillings. The shoemaker agreed, and by 5 o'clock that afternoon, Sheppard was able to walk freely. He tore his clothes to make himself look like a beggar and walked back to London. He stayed in a poor tavern in the city and talked to the landlady about the adventures of Jack Sheppard.
"I hope he escapes again,"
the woman said.
"He's a brave young man."
"So do I,"
Jack replied.
"He might do it too."
Jack then walked around the streets, where he heard 2 ballad singers singing about his adventures. A few nights later, he broke into a shop in Drury Lane and stole some fine clothes, a sword, rings, watches, and other items. He put on the stolen clothes and went to find his old friends. He ate in taverns with his friends, and he even visited his mother to tell her that he was free once more. He celebrated his new freedom by drinking a lot of wine and brandy. At midnight, the boy who worked in the tavern where Jack Sheppard was entertaining his friends recognized who he was. The boy called the authorities, and they arrested Sheppard and took him back to Newgate. Up until the end, Jack Sheppard hoped to escape his death at Tyburn. He hid a sharp knife in his pocket on the journey to the place of execution, but an officer discovered it and took it away from him. He had another plan for survival.
"After they hang me,"
he told his friends,
"you must put me into a warm bed and open a vein in my arm. I'm sure this will help me recover from the hanging."
He behaved with courage and dignity at the execution, and confessed his crimes. He was executed on the 21st of November, 1724.
Chapter 1. The Life of a Pirate. John Gow, the man who became known as the Orkney Pirate, was born in 1698 and grew up in the north of Scotland, on one of the Orkney Islands, where he became a sailor. He was very good at his profession and soon became third in command of a ship sailing for Santa Cruz. The crew of the ship were very unhappy with their conditions on board, and complained particularly about the food. The captain did not take their complaints seriously at first, but he soon changed his mind. He realized that the crew were preparing to take over control of the ship, and called the chief mate.
"I think we may have some trouble with the men,"
the captain explained.
"I want you to put some pistols in the cabin."
"Yes, sir,"
the chief mate replied. 2 members of the crew heard the conversation, and they told John Gow about the captain's preparations. Gow, who had always wanted to become a pirate, thought about what to do.
"If you take control of the ship, I'll help you.
Gow told the men.
But I want to be the new captain."
Gow was excited. It looked as if his secret desire to be a pirate was really going to happen. That night, a group of rebel sailors attacked the senior officers of the ship, murdering the doctor, the chief mate, and then the captain. They elected John Gow the new captain of the ship. Not all of the crew had been involved in the mutiny, and the innocent men were now hiding, frightened that they might be killed too.
Nothing will happen to you if you continue to obey orders as you did before the mutiny. But now I'll give the orders.
John Gow told the men. The sailors agreed. The rebels decided to change the name of the ship from the George Galley to the Revenge. They left for Spain and Portugal, where they hoped to steal a large quantity of wine. During the journey, they discovered a British fishing ship, which they decided to attack and capture. They sailed very close to the ship, and Gow shouted his commands to the other captain.
We're pirates, and we're going to capture your ship,
he shouted.
It's useless to resist us. If you try, we'll kill all of you.
We won't fight,
the other captain shouted back.
Come and take what you want.
They had no use for the cargo or the ship, so they sank the ship and kept its captain and 4 of his men on the Revenge. They then attacked a Scottish fishing ship. Once again they sank the ship and took the men onto the Revenge. By now they did not have much drinking water, so they decided to go to the Portuguese island of Madeira. They anchored some distance away from the harbour and made a plan. 7 men left for the harbour in a small boat. Their instructions were to capture a ship and bring it out of the harbour. If they couldn't do this, they had to steal wine and water and bring it back to the Revenge. This attempt failed, however, and they decided to leave Madeira. They sailed about 10 miles along the coast until they reached a small town, Port Santa. Gow sent some men to the town with a present of fish for the governor. The governor treated them very politely and visited the Revenge as a guest. Gow and the rebels entertained the governor and his friends very well at first. Later, however, when the boat they had sent to the island for food and drink came back without any, Gow threatened the governor and his friends.
We want food and wine,
he told the governor and his friends.
If you don't get it for us immediately, we'll kill you.
The governor was very surprised and frightened.
I'll make sure you get food and wine,
he said.
There's no need to kill anyone.
The pirates then left for the coast of Spain, where they found a British ship carrying slaves. They captured the ship and put on board all the men they had taken from other captured ships. Then they took all the food and drink from the ship and allowed it to continue on its way. Their next capture was a French ship, which had a cargo of wine, oil, and fruit. The pirates stole the goods and gave this ship to the Scottish captain whose fishing ship they had sunk, and he took his men on board with him. Gow was delighted with his crew.
Well done, men,
he cried.
If we go on like this, we'll all be rich men.
The pirates cheered their captain. Soon they saw another French ship approaching. It was a large ship and had 32 guns, so Gow called his crew together to discuss tactics. He told them it was too dangerous to risk attacking a ship with so many guns. All the crew agreed with him except Lieutenant Williams, who was a violent, dangerous man.
You're not brave enough to be in command of a pirate ship,
Williams told him.
We should attack this ship, capture it, and throw all its men into the sea.
Gow looked angrily at the lieutenant.
I say that it's too dangerous to attack that ship,
he replied.
And I won't throw prisoners into the sea. There's been too much violence already.
Williams took out his pistol and pointed it at Gow, but it did not fire. 2 pirates immediately shot Williams, injuring him seriously. Williams jumped into the hold and threatened to blow the ship up. But some of the pirates fought him and tied him up, then put him with the French prisoners. Their next capture was another British ship. Again they stole all the food and drink from the ship, and then put their prisoners on board the captured ship. They also put Williams on board, and instructed the captain of the ship to hand Williams over to the British authorities. Williams knew that if he was taken back to England, he would be executed.
"Don't send me back to England,"
he asked Gow very humbly.
"You know what will happen to me there. Throw me into the sea if you like, but don't send me back to England."
Gow did not say a word to Williams, but some of the pirates began to laugh cruelly at him.
"They'll hang you,"
they told him.
"Have a good voyage to the gallows."
Chapter 2. Captured. The pirates' next problem was where to go.
"North America. That's the place for us.
Some of them suggested.
We'll be safe there, and we can find all the things we want."
Gow, however, was against this. He wanted to go back home.
"We'll go to the Orkney Islands,"
he told the crew.
"I know the place well, and we can easily sell what we've captured and live comfortably off the profits. Anyway,"
he continued,
"we need to repair the ship as well. We can only do that in a northern port."
Eventually the crew accepted his decision, and the ship sailed for the Orkney Islands. When they arrived at one of the islands, Gow told his crew how to behave when they went ashore.
"You must say that we were sailing from Cadiz to Stockholm, but that bad winds drove the ship too far north. You must also tell the local people that you want to repair the ship, and that if they help you, you'll pay them very well."
But Gow's luck began to go against him. The sailors on board the ship who had not wanted to join the mutiny saw their opportunity. When one of the ship's boats went to the island, a sailor escaped from the pirates and went in search of the local sheriff.
"The Revenge is really a pirate ship,"
he explained.
"I had to stay on board because they threatened to kill me."
"You did the right thing to come here and tell me,"
the sheriff replied. Then the sheriff ordered his men to make preparations to capture the ship. Another 10 sailors who had been forced to join the mutiny stole the ship's boat and sailed to the mainland of Scotland. They were arrested when they arrived in Edinburgh and put in prison because the authorities thought they were pirates. Despite the loss of these members of his crew, Gow did not move the ship. He decided to stay in the bay and to rob the gentlemen and ladies who lived on the island. When they had finished, they sailed to a neighbouring island called Calf Sound. Gow wanted to rob the house of a gentleman who lived there, a man called Fee, who Gow had been at school with. Gow brought the Revenge too close to the rocks when he anchored the ship, and he sent a letter to Mr. Fee asking for a boat so that he could pull his ship away from the rocks. Mr. Fee was suspicious of the sailors because he knew they had robbed a lady on one of the small islands nearby. He ordered his servants to sink his own boat so that Gow and his men could not use it. That evening 5 of Gow's men went to Mr. Fee's house. They were carrying weapons, and they threatened to kill Mr. Fee if he did not help them.
"Our captain, John Gow, says you must give us a boat to leave the island, or we'll kill you this instant,"
said one of the men.
"If you want me to help you, you'll have to be nicer than that,"
said Mr. Fee.
"Let's go to the tavern for a drink, and we can discuss things."
Before they left for the tavern, Mr. Fee secretly instructed his servants to sink the boats they had come in.
"These men are very dangerous. They're pirates, and I'm going to arrest them if I can. I want you to sink their boats, then come back to me immediately."
After a while, one of his servants arrived at the tavern and asked to speak to him for a moment outside. The servant explained that they had followed his orders about the pirates' boats. Mr. Fee ordered 6 servants to hide behind some trees with their weapons. He said that he would walk back that way either with the ship's officer alone or with all 5 pirates. His men must be prepared to attack the pirates and capture them. Mr. Fee went back into the tavern and asked the officer to come with him to inspect his boat. The officer agreed, and they left the tavern together. When they passed the hedge where Mr. Fee's men were hiding, they ran out and captured the pirate. They tied him up and left one of the 6 servants in charge of him. Then Mr. Fee and his 5 remaining servants went back to the tavern. They ran through the 2 doors, showing their weapons.
"Surrender!"
they shouted. The pirates had no choice, and they too became prisoners. The next day, the wind blew the Revenge onto the rocks of the island. Gow sent a message to Mr. Fee, telling him that he was offering £1,000 for help in getting the ship away from the island. He also sent a sailor to the island with a present of a bottle of brandy for Mr. Fee. Mr. Fee, however, was determined to capture all the pirates and send them to prison.
"I'll give you a boat,"
Mr. Fee offered.
"but you'll have to send a ship's carpenter with 2 or 3 men to repair it."
Gow sent the men, and Mr. Fee immediately captured them. Then he sent Gow a message saying that all the pirates had to come and take the boat, as his men were working on it and getting it ready for the pirates' escape. Once again, John Gow instructed his crew to go to the island, and this time he came with them. Mr. Fee's men were able to capture them all. All 28 pirates were now sent to Edinburgh, and then to Marshalsea Prison in London, where they found their former partner, the cruel Lieutenant Williams. 12 of them were condemned to death, including John Gow, but 5 of them were found not guilty because they had been forced to join the rebellion. John Gow's days as a pirate were finally over. He was sent to Newgate Prison and tried at the Old Bailey. A strange thing happened during John Gow's execution on the 11th of August 1729. The officials tied the rope around his neck and pushed him off the cart. He hung in the air for a moment, struggling terribly. Then suddenly the rope broke, and he fell to the ground. He was in agony. The officials took hold of him and tied the rope around his neck again. Then they put him back on the cart and pushed him off once more. This time the rope did not break, and in a few moments the famous pirate was dead. His body was hung in chains by the River Thames as a warning to other pirates.
Chapter 6. The Phone Call. Anna was in the front garden of Dolphin Cottage, and she waved as she saw the boat come into the harbour. "You two seem very happy together," said Tristan. "Yes," Stephen agreed. They had known Tristan for only a few days, and it seemed to Stephen a rather personal thing to say, but then Stephen realised he didn't mind. "Have you got anyone special?" he asked. "Sort of," Tristan replied, and busied himself tying up the boat to the harbour side. He didn't really feel like going into detail about it at that moment. One reason was that he was thinking about Anna, not Jill. "Thanks for the trip," said Stephen. "It was great. By the way, if you're not doing anything tonight, would you like to come and have dinner with us? We could barbecue the fish. Bring your friend if you want." "Okay, thanks. It'll just be me, though," said Tristan, pleased at the thought of seeing Anna again. Fine. See you about 8 then. Stephen walked up from the harbour and held up his fish to show Anna, but when he got nearer, he could see that something was wrong. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Has something happened?" "Afraid so. Rebecca's just phoned and said your office needs you to ring them immediately." "Oh, shit! I knew we shouldn't have left our number with Rebecca," he said angrily. "What the hell do they want? I don't feel like ringing them back. I think I just won't, and pretend we never got the message. Do you know if Rebecca told the office she knew where we were?" "Apparently she said she'd pass the message on to you, so I guess you'll have to contact them." "Oh, bloody hell!" Stephen threw the fish down on the table and went inside. She could hear him in the kitchen, noisily making a cup of coffee. She wondered what the problem was at his office. She had met Charlie Jardine, Stephen's boss, a couple of times, and he'd seemed to be a reasonable person. What was it all about? Stephen must be talking to him now. She could hear his voice rising in anger, and then she heard him put the phone down with a bang. He came out and sat next to Anna. His face was red with anger. "Well?" she asked. "Charlie wants everybody back in the office for a crisis meeting tomorrow. Everybody, and that includes me," Stephen replied. "Another agency wants to buy our company." "Can't you talk about it on the phone?" Anna asked. "Apparently things are happening so quickly, and he needs to be able to act fast." Stephen stood up and started walking up and down the tiny front garden. "And he says he wants to do what's best for the company. He sounded really worried on the phone." "So you're going then," she said, rather coldly. "I'll have to. Mark's been called back from a conference in Italy as well." "Well, that's work, not a holiday," said Anna sharply. "I know. Oh, look, I'm sorry." Stephen put his arms round her. "I know this has ruined things for you as well. If I go this morning, I'll come back straight after the meeting. I'll drive through the night if I have to, but I promise I'll be back for breakfast on Thursday." "Could you lose your job if someone buys the company?" Anna asked. "Yes, it's quite possible," Stephen said. "It's also possible I could lose it anyway. The agency is obviously in a bad way, as far as money goes." "Oh, Stephen, just when we were beginning to relax here. It's not fair," said Anna, close to tears. Stephen finished his coffee and went back into the cottage. Anna continued to sit in the front garden. Half an hour later, Stephen appeared, carrying a small bag and wearing his work trousers. "I'll walk with you to the car," said Anna. It felt unreal to both of them, him going, her staying. She could see that Stephen's mind was already full of work. The inside of the car was hot from being in the sun, so they opened all the doors to let some air in. "You'll be okay on your own for 2 days, won't you?" said Stephen. "Yes, no problem. Don't worry about me. You just be careful driving. Take care, please." "I will. Bye, love." "Bye." "I don't know what to say. Good luck, I suppose. Ring me tonight from home. I want to know you're there." Anna watched Stephen drive away. Poor man, she thought, and then, selfishly, I'm pleased I don't have to go too. Chapter 7. Tristan Comes for Dinner. Anna had a pleasant day. It was difficult not to. Polreath was the same interesting place, and the weather was wonderful again. She walked around and did a bit of shopping. Some people in the village were beginning to greet her. "Mornin', another nice day," they said, and she smiled back. She sat in the front garden of the cottage, reading and watching all the comings and goings in the harbour. She was learning to recognize some of the different boats, which ones were fishing boats, and which ones were owned by visitors. Tristan's boat, full of passengers, went out, and she decided she'd find out where he was going the next day. It might be nice to do something with other people tomorrow, she thought. She looked at Stephen's fish in the fridge and remembered how pleased he'd looked when he'd got off Tristan's boat earlier that day. I'll have some later, she thought. Don't want to waste them. In the late afternoon, she went for a swim. Back home, she showered and sat with a glass of white wine in the front garden until the sun disappeared behind the hill. Then she went inside to get some dinner. There was a knock on the door, and Tristan appeared. "Hello? I hope I'm not late." "Pardon?" said Anna. "Late for what?" "Dinner. Stephen asked me for dinner." Tristan could see something was wrong. "Oh, no. I can see you didn't know." "I'm sorry. Come in. No, I didn't know. The thing is," explained Anna, "Stephen's had to go back to London. He had a phone call when you were out fishing this morning, and he's gone." "Oh, I'm sorry. Is everything all right? I mean, I hope nothing bad has happened." Tristan meant what he said, but if he was honest with himself, he was also pleased that Anna was now here alone, without Stephen. "It's a crisis at work," Anna said. "He didn't want to leave, but he'll be back on Thursday, he says." "Oh, good. Anyway, I'll go. Don't worry about dinner," said Tristan. "No, stay, really," she said. "I was just grilling the fish. I can easily do some more. Help yourself to a glass of wine." "Well, if you're sure. Thanks." Tristan poured himself a drink and filled up Anna's glass as well. "Can I do anything?" he asked. "You could cut the bread, if you want, and take all the plates and stuff outside. Is it okay with you if we eat outside?" "Fine." Tristan carried everything into the front garden and waited for Anna. He felt a bit strange sitting there, remembering other times he'd had dinner at the cottage. Jill and he used to eat there most evenings during their first summer together. But when she was here earlier this year, though, she seemed to prefer to eat at his house, or in the village somewhere. The cottage had become Jill's private world. Anna brought the fish. Strange, he thought to himself. There's Jill and Stephen in London, and Anna and me here. Tristan talked a bit about his day. After the fishing that morning, he'd been quite busy. 2 trips with a full boat each time, up the coast, looking at the land from the sea. He seemed surprised when she asked him if he ever got bored doing the same trips every week. "Never bored," he said. "Annoyed, maybe, at some of the stupid questions people ask sometimes. But basically, I can't think of a better way of earning a living." The phone rang and made them both jump. "That'll be Stephen, I hope," said Anna, and went to answer it. Tristan sat and thought how much he liked Anna's company. She came back out a few minutes later. "Yes, it was. He said sorry about tonight, about forgetting to tell me you were coming to dinner, and he says London is hot, airless, and dirty." "Does he enjoy his job, whatever it is?" asked Tristan. "He works for an advertising agency. To be honest, I don't know if he does enjoy it anymore. He used to, but recently something's changed. Maybe he's changed. He was hoping, well, actually, I was hoping, this holiday would give him a chance to have a good think about it all. Perhaps now the decisions will be taken for him. He may come back on Thursday without a job. But I'm sorry, you probably don't want to hear all that. You were just being polite." "No, I wasn't, if you understand me. I'm interested. I like the little I know about Stephen. I enjoyed our fishing trip this morning." Tristan paused and then said, "Maybe it's my turn, to be honest. You see, you and Stephen make me think about myself and my, I don't know what to call her, woman friend, girlfriend, whatever." Anna waited for him to go on. He told her about Jill and him, and the difficulties of continuing a long-distance relationship. He spoke quite openly about it all. Anna couldn't help comparing him with Stephen. Stephen always had such difficulty trying to explain something personal. The death of his father had hit him hard, but he still hadn't really talked about it with her. Only once, about 3 months ago, when she'd found him in the kitchen crying. Then he'd managed to talk about it a bit. Poor darling Stephen. People who only saw his public face just didn't know him. They opened another bottle of wine and carried on talking, about him, about her and Stephen, about the village, and the people who lived there. Finally, Tristan stood up. "It's time I went. Thank you for a really nice evening. You're a good listener. So are you." "Shall I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes, I was thinking of coming on one of your trips. Where are you going in the morning?" asked Anna. "Out past Skellig and round the rocks." He took a step nearer her. "It's a good trip. The boat leaves at 10. "Fine. I'll be there." Maybe it was the wine, but he seemed to be standing closer. He put his hands on her shoulders and kissed her quite firmly on the lips. "Good night. See you in the morning," he said, and closed the gate behind him.